Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about matters relating to business, professions, and wealth building. All of those, financial topics. So today is our monthly, my monthly show, Economic Echoes, where I go through the various economic indicators and help break down how these will actually affect you on an individual level. So for those of you who have seen this show or any of my shows before, we don't live according to the National Consumer Price Index. It's meaningless for most of our lives because how it's calculated is not how we live. It's aggregating a whole lot of data. And so I'm going to take you through various indicators, and hopefully this will help you understand not only what things have happened to you in the past, but what decisions you may need to make as you look toward the future. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in here. Okay, so I always start out with the Consumer Price Index, and let's see. Okay, there we go. So what you can see here is that as of these are the figures through or for September, for last month. Okay, so the consumer price deck, the CPI, all items went up 2.4%. Now this was about a 0.1% drop from last month. So, for all intents and purposes, inflation has stayed, at least nationally, has stayed essentially even. The inflation rate for food is 2.3%. Now, the cost of energy went down almost 7%, which is likely what held inflation in check because, as you can see, all items less food and energy went up 3.3%. So everything but food and energy went up significantly more than the overall rate. But because energy went down so much, that's what kept inflation overall in check. So let's first of all now let's drill down into these. So food at home. The cost of food at home went up only 1.3%, whereas food away from home, restaurants, etc., went up almost 4%. So, and this is a similar trend to last month. So, if you're like me and you eat at home, so we probably didn't experience as big a price increase, or we didn't experience inflation as badly as people who eat out in restaurants. Okay, so food at home, and again, it depends on what you eat. So if you eat poultry, meat, fish, eggs, so that went up quite a bit. Now I eat a little bit of this, but I don't eat a lot of meat and poultry. I don't think it's going to take us. It won't take us down into the unfortunately, into the detail of that. Okay, dairy products went up only 0.5%. Fruits and vegetables went up only 0.7%. So, eating a healthy diet it turns out to be, less costly. So, non-alcoholic beverages went up just 1.3%, and other food items went up 0.4%. You'll notice, by the way, that cereals and bakery products essentially were unchanged. So that's what's going on with food. Now let's look at energy. Okay, so energy commodities went down. Look at this, 15.3%. Okay, that was offset by energy services going up 3.4%. Okay, so what is it in energy commodities that went down so much? Well, fuel oil went down 22.4%. So if you're in the Northeast and you need fuel oil to heat your home, I mean, it's kind of early in the season, so maybe that's why it dropped so much, but the cost dropped significantly. But gasoline also dropped by 15.3%. So that's really, for those of us who drive cars, that's mainly what kept inflation in check, it appears. Now, if you take public transportation, so you didn't benefit from the cost of gasoline decreasing, because I would venture to say that public transportation, organizations didn't lower their prices because their fuel costs dropped. Okay. Now let's go back to energy services. So electricity went up almost 4%, 3.7%, and natural gas went up 2%. So, if you have an all-electric home, so you experienced inflation at a higher rate than those of us who have a combination electric and gas home. So in my house, I have electricity, of course, but my heating and my range, my cooktop is gas. My oven is electricity. So because I have a combination, for me, energy services went up at a more moderate pace because natural gas only went up by 0.2%. Okay, so we've looked at food and energy. Now let's look at all other items. So commodities less food and energy actually declined 1%, whereas services less energy services went up by 4.7, almost 5%. Again, let's drill down. Okay, so what went up and what went down? Well, apparel went up almost 2%. New vehicles went down a little over 1%. Used cars went down. It doesn't want to, for some reason, it doesn't want to show me the, oops. Hold on. Let's, okay. It doesn't want to, for some reason, it doesn't want to show me that. Okay. So I'm not sure why this thing is doing this. Okay. So, so tobacco products went up 8%. So if you're a smoker, you experienced inflation at a much higher rate. Now, cars went down in price, 1.3% for new vehicles. It looks like about 5% for 5.1% for used vehicles. But if you didn't buy a car, you didn't get the benefit of the price of cars dropping. On the other hand, medical care went up 1.6%. Okay, so if you're, again, not a huge increase. Okay, alcoholic beverages went up 1.5%. So, rather moderate levels for commodities, less food and energy. Okay, now services less food and energy. Okay, housing, shelter went up by almost 5%, 4.9. Okay, medical care services 3.6%. Transportation services went up 8.5%. Okay, so if you're using public transportation, for example, when I was mentioning a minute ago, while the price of gasoline dropped 15.3% last month, your cost of transportation went up presumably 8.5%, or some part of public transportation, right? So again, that's a huge split. That's a 23% differential between gasoline versus transportation services. So again, that's why when you drill down in this, if you are someone who uses public transportation, eats a diet heavy in meat and poultry, and you smoke, so you may be thinking 2.4%. What's that about? I think my costs went up, double that or maybe more. Yes, for you they did, because of the basket of goods that you buy. Okay, so this 2.4% is based on all of these things we just looked at. So, for example, that a used car went down 5%. impacts this and holds it down. Of course, if you didn't buy a car, you're experiencing inflation at a higher rate. Okay, so now let's go back and let's look at inflation on the local level. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so inflation on the local level. I use Los Angeles as an example, but you can find inflation for your locality. All you need to do is do a internet search CPI and then put your location: San Diego, Omaha, Miami, Norfolk, Virginia, wherever you are. Okay, so here in Los Angeles, okay, we experienced inflation overall of 2.8%, so higher than the national average. Food prices went up 3.4%. Energy prices declined 3.2%. Okay, so we're, this, and by the way, this lower decline in energy prices, which is, I think, reflected in a lower decline of gasoline prices, that accounts for why inflation is higher in the greater Los Angeles area, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, than it is nationally. So you can see that food prices went up 0.6% for the month of September. Food prices at home increased 0.8%. This is interesting. This is due to higher prices for fruits and vegetables of 4.8%. Remember that on the national level, they went up only about 1%. Okay, meat, fish, and poultry and eggs went up 1.5%. In the Los Angeles area, they went up much higher than that in the in the national average. Okay, food prices away from home went up 0.4% for the same period. So a much more moderate increase so it looks like I should have been eating out more last month because as I mentioned before, I eat a diet heavy in fruits and vegetables when it went up, which went up almost 5%. Okay, so now looking at energy, okay, energy index advanced 0.2% for September. This was due mainly to higher gasoline prices. Okay, prices for electricity were unchanged. Prices for natural gas decreased 0.3%. Okay, so while gasoline prices declined nationally, here in the Los Angeles area, they actually went up a little bit. Okay, and now that I think of it, I didn't notice gasoline prices going down last month or even the beginning of this month. So there you go, right? Energy prices declined 13% year over year. Now that's because overall gasoline prices have decreased almost 21% year over year, and prices paid for natural gas have decreased 10% year over year, whereas electricity has essentially been flat. Okay, so these are this is why I encourage you to take 20 minutes, use the links that you'll find in the show notes for this show, and look at your situation so you can understand. It's all good and well when the news, when the newspaper, well, you probably don't read a newspaper, but when, the news being reported says, well, inflation went up 2.4%, but that doesn't have a big impact on us locally. Okay, and here you can look at in the 1 month and the 12-month increases for this year. You can see that in January, inflation was at 2.5%, but since then it's been higher than that. So inflation is essentially increased here in the Los Angeles area, and you can see every month, with the exception of June, where inflation went down 0.2%, it's gone up at least a little bit. Although in the last few months, it's moderated quite a bit from the first 4 months of the year. Okay, so that is the inflation, the local inflation picture. All right, now let's from there go and look at the income picture. I think that's what I want, right? Real earnings. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay. All right, now we're going to look first at the national situation. So, as has been the case for the last several months, um, current and real earnings for all employees on private non-farm payrolls went up by 2 cents per hour from August to September, or essentially 0.2%. Okay, on a weekly basis, they actually dropped 40 cents an hour, or they went down 0.1%. Now, why is this different? It has to do with the number of hours worked. So you'll notice that although the hourly wage went up by 2 cents, because hours worked went down by 0.1%, when you look at it on a weekly basis, okay, it actually comes out to lower weekly earnings. Okay, okay, so in point of fact, as we look at it aggregated nationally, we really, because hours worked decreased, even though hourly pay went up slightly, people, as a country, we didn't really gain any ground in September in terms of inflation went up, basically 0.2%, but weekly earnings went down 0.1%. So, in that sense, nationally things were, kind of evened out. Okay, so let's now look at the local picture for earnings. And yeah, okay, so this only comes out quarterly, so we haven't looked at this for the last couple of months. And this is data only through, you'll notice here, the second quarter. Oops. Let me enlarge this. Sorry about that. Okay. So you'll notice this is only through the second quarter of this year. So we won't get new data now until December, which will reflect data through the third quarter of this year, i.e. through the end of September. So this is through essentially the end of June. And you'll notice that the darker the color of the state, the higher the increase in personal income. Okay, so California, Utah, Idaho, Nebraska, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, South Carolina, New York, and Michigan, those that they were all in the top quintile, the top 20% of personal income increases. Now, the lightest colors are in the bottom 20%, okay, and that's Louisiana, 4.2, which is still pretty good, by the way. Indiana, 4.2, West Virginia, 3.9, Connecticut, 4.2. Now, Massachusetts is down there pretty close to the bottom, 2.8, New Hampshire, 4, North Dakota, only 2.3, so that is the bottom. South Dakota, 4.1, Minnesota, 4.1, Alaska, 4.1. So what you can see is, although the bottom is 2.3, actually only 2 states fall below a 4% increase in annualized personal income increases. So the good news is that because well, I'm gonna go, because the annual inflation rate has stayed fairly moderate this year, for most people in the country, on a state by state basis, it looks like we're at least keeping pace with inflation. So we're not losing ground anymore, even if we're not particularly gaining ground. Okay. So California at 6.5%, for example, where I live. So inflation, as you recall, in Los Angeles, 2.8%. Of course, that was for September. It was higher back in the second quarter, but nonetheless, I think even in California, people are gaining a little bit of ground. I think inflation was around 4 or 5% earlier this year in California. So Californians are gaining a little ground. But states like Alaska, Indiana, West Virginia, okay, they're probably just kind of coming out even, whereas North Dakota is probably losing ground, as may be Massachusetts, depending on what their local inflation rates are. Okay, so again, this is why I encourage you, dig into the local figures. So if you're feeling like you're not gaining any ground despite inflation moderating, it may be because the inflation rate in your locale is high enough that even though personal income in your state is increasing, the inflation is high enough that it's essentially offsetting it, and especially inflation on the things that you in particular buy, right? So again, I'm doing a little bit of apples and oranges, but let's say that you eat a diet heavy in meat and poultry, you smoke, and you ride public transportation. So those three went up so much that even if you had a personal income increase of 6% or 6.6, 6.7, South Carolina was the top one, 6.9, you may not feel like you gained any ground because the expenses that you incur are experiencing higher inflation than kind of the average, and so you're just treading water, whereas other people who buy different things may be gaining ground. Okay, so next, let's go with unemployment. And okay, here we go. Okay, so only the national unemployment figures were updated for September. They haven't updated the state figures yet. So I'm not going to look at the state by state figures because those are unchanged from what we talked about last month. But the unemployment rate in September overall for the country ticked down to 4.1% from, where's August? From 4.2%. So in July, it hit a little peak there of 4.3. Since then, it's come down a little bit. Okay, now that's the total. Now let's look at it by demographics. So for men 20 years and older, okay, September 3.7, lower than the national average, which is down from 4% in August. So for men 20 years and older, things have gotten better. Okay. For women, the unemployment rate is actually 3.6%, better than for men. And it was much better in August at 3.7% than the 4% for men. Okay. So women are experiencing lower unemployment. Again, this is on a national picture than men. Now, looking at teenagers, okay, in August they had where's August? Here we go. Okay, August 14.1%. In September, it ticked up just a little bit more to 14.3%. So probably, and you'll notice going from July at 12.4 to August, I talked about this last month, to August at 14.1, that probably reflects teenagers quitting jobs and because they're going back to school. So at this point, as of September, probably most 16 and 19-year-olds are back in school, and so we wouldn't expect to see a particularly dramatic change in unemployment for teenagers. Okay, the unemployment rate for whites, okay, September 3.6%, down from 3.8% in August, so a little bit lower. For Black or African Americans, it's the unemployment rate was 5.7%, down from 6.1%. So it dropped almost a 0.5% since August, and it dropped over a 0.5% since July. Okay, so the employment picture for Blacks nationally is improving. Okay, now for Asians, okay, here we have. Oops, where's the Asian one? Here we go. Oh, okay, here we go. So Oh, I'm going to take off the whites because they're too close. Okay, so Asian unemployment for September, 4.1%, essentially matching the national average, but that's up from, oh no, it's even with August at 4.1%. Okay, so for Asians, employment has remained pretty steady. And then finally, for Hispanics and Latinos, okay, unemployment down to 5.1% from 5.5%. So it dropped almost 0.5%. So again, the employment picture for Blacks and Asians or Blacks and Hispanics or Latinos have dropped, whereas for Asians it was flat, and for whites it dropped just a little bit. Okay, so why is that the case? Can't really say. I mean, these changes aren't huge, but they are, they tell you kind of how you may be experiencing unemployment. Okay, so now let's look at the labor force participation rate. Okay. Now, when we talk about unemployment and such, we're talking specifically about um, um, for the anyway, I'm going to skip that. Never mind. Okay. All right. So the labor force participation rate in September, 62.7%. It's been that way for the last several months. So the labor force participation rate hasn't changed. Now, that means then that with the drop in unemployment nationally, okay, of 0.1%, that actually means that more people are working now, okay, because the drop in the labor force participation, there was no drop in the force participation rate that would account for lower unemployment. Okay, you can get lower unemployment in two ways. One is by having more people working, the other is by having fewer people looking for work and dropping out of the labor force. Okay, all right, so again, looking at men, okay, labor force participation rate at 70.4%, and that's up from 70.3%. But you will notice, by the way, that from earlier in the last 2 decades, the labor force participation rate for men was above 75% until around September of 2008, when we had the recession, and it really hasn't recovered since then. And indeed, it has declined since then. And the labor force participation rate for men has not recovered from its pre-pandemic to its pre-pandemic level of over 71%. Okay, now looking at women. Okay, so the labor force participation rate for women is down to 58.9% from 59.2%. So it dropped a little bit, but not a whole lot. However, this may be why we saw a bigger drop in the unemployment for women. It's because some women left the workforce, the workforce, and therefore there's fewer women searching for jobs, and therefore the unemployment rate went down. For women too, okay, employment hasn't I guess it's pretty much recovered to the pre-pandemic levels, but like with men, the labor force participation rate for women post the 2008 recession, it has not recovered to that level. So you'll notice it was over 60% for that time period prior to the recession, and since then it's been trending down. Although for women it is trending back up, whereas for men it's sort of bumping along right around the 70% level and doesn't seem to be changing. Okay, and then for teenagers, okay, so their labor force participation rate was 37.2%. That's up quite a bit from August, when it was 35.7. So it's up 1.5% basically. Okay, so a lot of teenagers went, relatively speaking, a lot of teenagers joined the workforce. Nonetheless, and that's why, that's at least part of the reason why unemployment for teenagers went up, because more teenagers came into the workforce, and so there's more of them looking for jobs. And so even if a lot of them got jobs, that still was outweighed by the number who came in looking for jobs. The teenage labor force participation rate not only has recovered post-pandemic, it's actually higher than it was during I should say has recovered post-pandemic, but it's higher than it was pre-pandemic. However, it has not recovered from the 2008 recession, when generally speaking, it was over 40%. Okay, so you can see there have been some permanent shifts in the labor force participation rate. Okay, now let's look at labor force participation for whites. Looks like it was pretty much on par with what it was last month. Yeah, 62.3 or 62.4 in September, 62.3 the previous month. Okay, for blacks or African Americans, labor force participation rate 62.9, up. July, August. Okay, up a little bit from August at 62.7. Okay, Asian labor force participation rate went down to 65.3. Oh, well, okay, from 65.4 last month. So it was basically even with last month. The big drop was from June, when it was almost 66. Now it's almost 1% lower at 65.3. Okay, so Asians are dropping out of the workforce over recent months for some reason. And then finally, Hispanics and Latinos. Okay, labor force participation rate among Hispanics and Latinos, 67.4% last month, down from 67.8%. So that's part of the reason why, by the way, Hispanics saw a bigger drop in unemployment than other demographic groups. Okay, because some Hispanics have left the labor force. Now, it's interesting to note that Hispanics and Latinos and Asians have a higher workforce participation rate than whites and blacks or African Americans have. Okay, and you'll notice that is the case historically for Hispanics and Latinos overall. However, for Asians and whites, the divergence really has happened kind of post-pandemic, and don't know exactly why that is the case, but it has been the case. Whereas for blacks, the labor force participation rate, generally speaking, has been lower, although post-pandemic, it's tended to converge with whites. Okay, so there are obviously some demographic changes going on in the United States that make things different now than they were 20 years before. Okay, next. Okay, next we're going to look at employment by industry. And again, I don't have the state figures for labor force participation. They weren't released yet, nor were the local or state figures for industry, employment by industry. Okay, so what you see here is basically, I think, mimicking what we've been seeing for most of the year. So the biggest increases in employment are coming in construction, where there was a net change of 25,000, a net increase in 25,000 in September. In private education and health services, 81,000 job increase. Leisure and hospitality, a 78,000 job increase. and government a 31,000 job increase. Now, if you add private education and health services, 81, with government, 31, you get about 110, 111, 12,000 of the job increase. If you add leisure and entertainment, 78,000, to construction, 25,000, you get a little less, you get about 100,000, 103,000 jobs. So you can see that that government, that private health, public education and health services is largely a government fueled employment increase. So employment increases are coming almost as much from government increasing as it is from the private sector increasing. Okay, so and then you'll notice the laggards are manufacturing. Again, we lost manufacturing jobs, 7,000, and transportation and warehousing, we lost 8,600 jobs. Okay, so those were the two worst. So let's look at these in detail now. Okay, so in construction of buildings actually decreased, but specialty trade contractors, that was really where the big increase in construction employment came. This is probably due to, let's see, okay, specialty residential, okay, remodels and non-residential remodels. Okay, so that's where that's really where construction increase is coming in terms of buildings. So new residential construction continues to see employment growth, but non-residential building has contracted. Okay, and that's why we saw a much more limited, or that's why we saw actually a contraction in the employment of the construction of buildings. Okay, heavy and civil engineering. Heavy and civil engineering. That just is what it is. Okay, all right. Now, okay, go back. All right, now let's look at private education and health services. So you can see healthcare and social services once again make up the largest bulk of job increases. 26,500, 45,000. So that's 60, 70. It's about 71,000 jobs out of the total of about 80. I think it was 81,000 jobs. So you can see they're almost all in industries that are heavily funded by the government. Okay, private educational. Oh no, there's no drill down there. Okay, healthcare. Let's see. Okay, so all of the healthcare services saw pretty good increases. And social assistance, okay, individual and family assistance, that was really where the big increase came. Okay, and then child care services next. All right, now why are these important? Because the answer is, if you are in one of these industries, this shows you where jobs are growing and whether there is likely to continue to be opportunity for you in that sector, or if things are contracting. Okay, next. Excuse me. Leisure and hospitality, almost all the growth came in accommodation and food services, and it really almost all of it came in food services and drinking places. Okay, not too surprising. Okay, arts, entertainment, and those kind of things. So amusement increased, but museums once again and historical sites decreased, and performing arts areas, 100 jobs, essentially unchanged. All right, and then finally, let's look at government. Okay, so the federal government, again, didn't see a whole lot of hiring. Government employment is increasing on the state and local level. And you can see here, local government education and other local government employment, almost equals 7,800, 8,800 jobs. So about split between those two. On the state government level, state government education, okay, was the bulk of increase in jobs in the states, whereas other government jobs were, a fifth of state government education jobs. Okay, and then on the federal level, so Postal Service saw 1,400 new jobs, and the government, except for the Postal Service, 1,100. So that gives you an idea. There's a roughly even split. Now, let's quickly look at manufacturing. So manufacturing and durable goods and non-durable goods decreased. Okay, but you can see it depends what it is. So if it was fabricated metal products, that actually increased. Non-metallic mineral product manufacturing increased, but pretty much everything else decreased or was unchanged. Well, machinery also increased somewhat, but everything else was pretty much unchanged or decreased. Okay, and then looking at non-durable goods. So food manufacturing did increase. Printing and related services and textile product mills went up a little bit. Everything else decreased or was roughly the same. Okay, so that's why manufacturing employment, is what it is. Okay, and then finally, transportation and warehousing. Okay, transit and ground passenger transportation that actually increased, as did couriers and messengers, but pretty much everything else was lower or was about the same. Okay, and so now let's just look real quickly at the 12-month picture, and you can see the 12-month picture is very similar to the 1-month picture. Okay, so these employment by industry trends have been pretty stable over the last 12 months. Okay, so you can see manufacturing went down, construction went up. Okay, for the year, transportation and warehousing went up, but not a whole lot, 0.7%. Okay, almost 1 million additional jobs in private education and health services, and over 500,000 jobs in government, and about 367,000 new jobs in leisure. So what you can see is at 1.5 million jobs connected to essentially government payrolls or government payments, that really is where job growth has been. That's really what's been driving job growth this year, even as that has been ameliorating somewhat in the last month or so. Okay, now let's look at, okay, we're going to look real quickly at some of the new things that I added. The median home price, I don't have updated information on that from last month, but so I'm just real quickly remind you, the median home price nationally at the end of the second quarter, $412,300. That's down from its peak of $442,600. So that's good. Now, as interest rates tick down, we've seen mortgage rates drop, so we may see a turnaround in the third quarter of the median home price, because as interest rates go down, people can afford to pay more for homes and they tend to bid prices up. So we'll watch that. Hopefully we'll be able to get some updated figures next month. Let's now look at home prices. These are that was the median home price, right? That's the one in the middle of prices. Average home prices is all home prices added up, divided by the number of homes. So in the US, average home prices have gone up 2.7% year over year. This Zillow is giving us the current figure. Okay. And we can look at specific locations. So we'll look at where I live, Los Angeles, California. Okay. Concurrent with the national average, up to $950,000, a 2.7% increase. Okay. Let's look at Omaha, Nebraska, which I think went okay. Now, Omaha, Nebraska, the average home price about $277,500, increased only 2.2%. Oops, come on. Okay, and then let's look at Miami, Florida. Okay, Miami, Florida, look at that, 7.1% increase, triple the national average, up over $580,000. Okay, so why is this important? Well, if you own a home, right, it's giving you an idea of what may be happening to the value of your wealth. If you're looking to move someplace else, this is giving you an idea of how home prices are trending, and so if you're gonna move to Miami, from Omaha, the rate of home price increases is much, much greater, and it may be harder for you to get into the market. Now, that's on the home ownership side. Let's look at the rental side next. Okay, so this is giving you an idea of various markets. So let's look at Los Angeles. Okay, so the median rental rate in Los Angeles. Oh, let's wait a minute. Let's hold the phone here. Okay. Okay. Median. Let's look for. Okay. Well. Okay. So unfortunately, this isn't any more updated than it was last time we looked at it. So I'm gonna move on from this and talk about the last metric I have for you, which does have updated information, and that is retirement savings, average retirement savings for the top 10 states. Okay. So, the top 10 states of people saving for retirement. Top is Connecticut at $634,000, followed by New Jersey, $605,000, Virginia, $590,000, Maryland. Notice that these don't have what are typically thought of as the two wealthiest states, California and New York. Okay, now part of that, now Connecticut is kind of a suburb of New York in some ways, as is New Jersey. Okay, but Californians, it shows you that the net worth of Californians is not particularly high, even though the cost of living is high and salaries are high. Okay, so what that means is it's people in California are having a hard time saving money. So if you're looking for a place to move to where it appears to be easier to accumulate wealth for retirement, these would be your top 10 locations. Now, this was a survey. Okay, so this survey was conducted as of April. This may be the same information that I showed you last time, except for I thought. Yeah, no, this is okay. So I think this is different because this article hadn't been released last time. So this is not showing you savings as of September or something like that. This is gathered from April, but I don't know that these trends change dramatically from month to month. But all that being said, on some level, these are the states where evidently it is easiest in order to accumulate wealth. Okay, so that is the situation. So all these links will be in the show notes. And I encourage you again, one last time here, to take a look at these things. It doesn't take very long. While I take 45 minutes going through all of this, it's only because I'm showing you examples on different things. For you, you can take 15 or 20 minutes, take a look at these metrics and find the ones quickly that are most appropriate to you. You don't need to look at the employment by industry statistics for a half a dozen different industries. You can just look at the one for yours or for the one that you're in and the one that you're considering going into. Okay, so you can do it in a much shorter period of time. But I encourage you to look at these because when we've got an election coming up, and it's not just a national election, right? There's state elections, local elections, and when you look at these kinds of things, we understanding how they're impacting us locally is as important as having a sense of how things are going in the country as a whole. So I thank you very much for joining me today. As always, it's my great pleasure to have you, especially if you're with me live. This is my last show for this week, so I will wish you a great rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the week as well. I'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time with my show Trust and Estates Weekly. Tuesday at 10 a.m. with business lessons from the military. 7 days from today with the next edition of People Making Money, again at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then a week from tomorrow, so Thursday of next week, is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. And that's at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So those are all the upcoming shows. So again, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage at all